I stared at her in disbelief, letting her words sink in. As they did, my mind wandered back to the past. I first met Tanya on my first day at a new school in 8th grade. She had just moved to the city and didn't know anyone. When I saw her, I felt a strange mix of emotions. I introduced myself, and she responded with a bright smile, saying she was glad to meet me. After school, I offered to walk her home, but she politely declined, explaining that she had plans with some girls she had just met. That was the first of many gentle rejections I received from her over the years. Though her refusals were always kind, they still stung. After we graduated from college, Tanya moved to the West Coast for work, while I stayed behind to join the family business. I tried to put her out of my mind, but she lingered in my thoughts. Even so, I didn't let my feelings for her stop me from dating others, and I had an active social life, though not with the person I truly wanted. A year after college, I met and married someone else. The marriage didn't last, ending after 2 years when I discovered my wife was unfaithful. I handled the situation calmly, asking the man to leave and my wife to move out while I consulted a lawyer. She pleaded with me, insisting it wasn't what I thought, and she loved me. She then shared her story, explaining that she and this man had been together since middle school and had planned to marry. After he moved away, they lost touch until they reconnected years later, only for him to discover she had already married me. They had lunch together a couple of times a week, and Nancy said she only agreed to it because she felt guilty, thinking he had stopped talking to her because he had moved on. During one of these lunches, he reminded her of the promises they made when they were younger. She told him she couldn't keep them because she was married now. He persisted, saying she owed him for all the times he left frustrated, but she kept refusing. Alan continued to pressure her, and eventually she decided to be with him just once, not out of love, but because she felt obligated to fulfill what she saw as a lingering debt, closing the chapter on their interrupted past. "I felt like I owed him something," she explained. "After everything he went through, he came back for me, only to find I hadn't waited for him. It was supposed to happen just once, and you were never supposed to find out. Honestly, it was just a one-time thing. I love you, Frank, and you know I do. Please try to understand and forgive me." I told her she still needed to pack her things and leave because I needed time to think without any distractions. She went to stay with her family while I took a week to reflect on everything. After a lot of thought, I decided to give Nancy another chance. She returned home and began doing everything she could to make up for what happened. But after a couple of months, I noticed she seemed to be trying too hard, and I started to suspect she was using it as a way to keep me from thinking about what she might be up to. I remembered she had mentioned meeting her ex-boyfriend for lunch, so I decided to check up on her. I took a day off work and parked near her office just before her lunch break. On Monday, nothing happened, but on Tuesday, she left the building at noon, and I followed her to the Starlight Motel. She parked in front of room 103 and waited. 2 minutes later, a car with California plates pulled up beside her. Alan got out, kissed her through the window, and then went to the office. He returned with a key, and they both entered room 103. I waited until she left, then followed her back to work. Once she was inside, I returned to the motel and used some cash to get information. I learned that Alan had reserved room 103 for both Tuesday and Friday. When I asked if there was anything special about that room, I found out it was the only one with a hot tub. The developer had planned for all the odd-numbered rooms on the first floor to have jacuzzis, but financial issues prevented the rest from being installed. As I drove home, a plan began to take shape in my mind. Surprisingly, I felt no animosity toward Pendergast. He had simply come back for the woman he loved. Yes, she was with someone else when he arrived, but his love for her made him disregard my existence. I was certain he'd spent part of their time together trying to convince her to leave me for him. Oh. The only question that lingered was why she hadn't done it. It was obvious she wanted to be with him. Why else would she be seeing him? That evening, Nancy was as cheerful as ever, and I continued with the routine as I had on Wednesday and Thursday. But Friday was different. When she pulled up and parked in front of room 103, I was ready to set my plan in motion. Once they were inside, I drove my rented U-Haul truck next to Nancy's car and started unloading boxes. I had rented the truck the day before and bought 75 boxes in preparation. After packing up all of Nancy's belongings earlier that day, I drove to the Starlight Motel to wait. I quietly unloaded the boxes and stacked them in front of the motel room door, creating a barrier 3 boxes deep. The only way to get out of the room would be to dismantle the wall from the inside, which would be difficult since it reached higher than the door. I also leaned the beds, springs, and mattress against the wall for good measure. The final part of the plan was set to unfold when they eventually left the room. A staff member would be waiting to hand Nancy an envelope, informing her that she had been served with divorce papers. I drove home and prepared for the confrontation I knew was coming, pouring myself a strong drink. I didn't bother changing the locks on the house. Nancy's name was on the title, and her paycheck helped cover the bills. I doubted we could coexist until the divorce was final, so one of us would likely have to move out, but it wouldn't necessarily be Nancy. The phone rang at 3:10, and when I answered, she asked, "Can I come home?" "It's not home anymore, Nance, but you can come to the house," I replied. She arrived at 3:25, and the first thing she said was the predictable, "It's not what you think, baby. I can explain if you let me." "Go ahead," I said. "I've had a rough day, and I could use a laugh." "I love you, baby. I really do. But I also have strong feelings for Alan. He's been such a big part of my life. Yada, yada, yada." I let her finish and then said, "So, you want both of us because you can't choose between us?" I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes before I continued, "Since you can't make a decision, I will. I've decided I don't want to be married to someone who betrays me." I glanced at my watch and added, "If you hurry, you can still make it to Alan's in time to cook him dinner." "But baby, just go, Nancy. You've broken my trust, and I can't be with you anymore." The divorce was messy, especially when it turned out that Nancy was pregnant. I refused to acknowledge paternity until I was sure the child was mine. When it was confirmed that the baby wasn't mine, Nancy's situation deteriorated. Thanks to the prenup she had signed, she didn't come out of the divorce well. The only surprise was that she didn't move in with Alan. He left town 2 months after I was served and didn't take her with him. 3 months after my divorce was finalized, I found myself sitting at the bar in the Landing Strip Lounge, my go-to spot. It was open mic night, and a series of aspiring comedians were taking turns entertaining the crowd. I recognized one of the performers as a clerk from the gas station, where I sometimes stopped. Since I knew her well enough to say hello, I paid close attention to her routine. A man once said to his wife, "I don't understand how you can be so beautiful and so stupid at the same time." The wife responded, "Let me explain. God made me beautiful so you would be attracted to me. God made me stupid so that I would be attracted to you." The joke drew loud laughter and applause, especially from the women in the room. She continued with her set, and the next joke seemed tailor-made for Bobby Denton, who was well known for his love of blonde jokes. A mathematician, a philosopher, and a blonde woman go to hell, where the devil gives them a challenge. If they can stump him, they'll go to heaven instead of burning in hell. The philosopher goes first, asking the devil a complex question. The devil smiles and whispers the answer. The mathematician follows, and the devil immediately gives the correct answer. Finally, it's the blonde's turn. She takes a chair, drills 3 holes in the seat, sits down, and says, "Now tell me which orifice the fart came out of." The devil confidently replies, "That's easy. It came out of all 3. The blonde laughs and says, "Don't be ridiculous." This joke got a good laugh from the audience. She then wrapped up her set with one more joke, saying, "One last one, then I've got to head home and put the kids to bed." In a dark, foggy room, Mystique looked into her crystal ball and delivered some grim news to Laura. "There's no easy way to say this, so I'll be blunt. Prepare to be a widow. Your husband will die a horrible and violent death this year." Laura, visibly shaken, stared at Mystique, then at the flickering candle, and finally at her own hands. After taking a few deep breaths to calm herself, she asked, "Will I be acquitted?" The room erupted in laughter, and she left the stage as Bobby Denton took the microphone. I had originally planned to stop in for just one beer before heading home, but I was enjoying myself and decided to have another drink. That decision led to a surprising turn of events. As Bobby asked if anyone in the audience wanted to try their hand at making the crowd laugh, a woman at a nearby table raised her hand. Her back was to me, but the moment my second cold PBR was placed in front of me, she turned around, and my heart nearly stopped. It was Tanya. Even after all these years, the sight of her still had a powerful effect on me. She took the microphone from Bobby and, with a smile, thanked him for giving her the chance to embarrass herself in public. Then she began her joke. A nice, calm, and respectable lady walked into a pharmacy, approached the pharmacist, looked him straight in the eye, and said, "I'd like to buy some cyanide." The pharmacist, shocked, asked, "Why on earth do you need cyanide?" The woman replied, "I want to poison my husband." The pharmacist's eyes grew wide with alarm. "Good Lord, I can't sell you cyanide to kill your husband. It's illegal. I'd lose my license." "We'd both go to jail. No way. You cannot have cyanide." The lady reached into her purse, pulled out a photo, and handed it to the pharmacist. It was a picture of her husband in bed with the pharmacist's wife. The pharmacist looked at the photo and said, "Well, you didn't mention you had a prescription." Tanya chuckled along with the audience before continuing her routine. The teacher gave her 5th grade class an assignment: have your parents tell you a story with a moral at the end. The next day the kids came back and began sharing their stories one by one. They were the usual tales: spilled milk, saved pennies, you know the type. Finally, the teacher got to Janie, who was the last to share. "Do you have a story to share with us, Janie?" "Yes, ma'am. My dad told me a story about my mom. She was a Marine pilot in Desert Storm, and her plane got shot down. She had to be rescued from enemy territory, and all she had with her was a flask of whiskey, a gun, and a knife. She drank the whiskey on the way down, so the flask wouldn't break when she landed, and then her parachute dropped her right into the middle of 20 Iraqi soldiers. She shot 15 of them with the pistol until she ran out of bullets, killed 4 more with the knife until the blade broke, and took out the last Iraqi with her bare hands." The horrified teacher asked, "Good Lord, what did your dad say the moral of that story was?" "Stay away from Mom when she's been drinking." The room erupted in laughter, and Tanya left the stage to thunderous applause. As I watched her return to her table, I debated whether I should try to say hello. The thought of getting blown off in front of 4 women I didn't know made me hesitate. Still, I decided to take a chance. I called the waitress over and ordered a round of drinks for the 5 women at Tanya's table. When the drinks arrived and the waitress pointed me out, all 5 women glanced my way. 2 of them waved in thanks before returning to their conversation. I wasn't expecting much, but I had hoped Tanya might acknowledge me. When she didn't, I finished my beer and started to leave. I was almost at the door when I heard, "Frank? Wait, Frank!" I turned to see Tanya walking towards me. She handed me a piece of paper and simply said, "Call me." She turned and walked back to her group. I looked at the slip of paper she'd given me. It was a bar napkin with a phone number scribbled on it. As I glanced back at her table, I noticed the other women staring at me in surprise. Tanya sat down among them, and they all seemed to be talking at once. I smiled to myself and walked home. The next morning, the first thing I noticed when I got out of bed was that bar napkin on the dresser, sitting there with the other things I'd emptied from my pockets the night before. I knew without a doubt that I was going to call Tanya, but the question was, when? Was it her home phone or her cell number? Should I wait until evening, risking that she might not be home if it was her landline? Or should I call right away and try to catch her before she left for work? If it was her cell, would she answer? Or was she the type to let calls go to voicemail while driving? What if she didn't drive to work but took the bus? Would she answer in public, or would she prefer not to talk around strangers? As I stood there staring at the piece of paper, lost in thought, a phrase my father used to say during tough decisions came to mind: "No courage, no glory." I took a deep breath, walked over to the bedside phone, and dialed the number. When she answered, all those old feelings rushed back. Tanya hadn't lost that spark that had always drawn me to her. My heart raced as I imagined her walking toward me. When we finally met for lunch, I stood up, extended my hand, and she walked over with that same confident stride. "It's really good to see you, Frank. I'm so glad you invited me to lunch," she said warmly. "The pleasure's all mine, Tanya," I replied, smiling as she slid into the booth across from me. "So, what have you been up to since we last saw each other?" she asked. "Just working and trying to live a decent life. How about you?" "Working and climbing the corporate ladder," she said with a hint of pride. "I remember you moved to the West Coast after graduation," I said. "I did. After a few years and a couple of promotions, I got the opportunity that brought me back here." "How long have you been back?" "About 3 weeks. Did you ever get married, Frank?" "I was, but not anymore. And you?" "I never took that step. I was too focused on my career to make time for it. Honestly, most of the men I met weren't worth the distraction, and definitely not worth sacrificing my career for." We spent lunch catching up, talking about our careers and where life had taken us. When the plates were cleared, she surprised me by saying, "Since you treated me to lunch, how about I treat you to dinner? Are you free tomorrow night?" I had plans, but they vanished the moment she asked. "I'm free," I said, trying to hide my excitement. She gave me her address, and I promised to pick her up at 6. She flashed that dazzling smile, said she'd see me then, and we both returned to work. On Friday, I arrived at Tanya's house 10 minutes early and waited in the car until 2 minutes past 6. When I finally rang the doorbell, the sight that greeted me took my breath away. In all the years I had known her, I had never seen Tanya look as stunning as she did when she opened the door. She was dressed to kill, and I knew it was no accident. Every part of me wanted to drop to my knees and beg her to be mine, and she knew it too. I couldn't help but wonder why. For years, she had sweetly turned me down, and now she was intentionally trying to captivate me. Why? Part of my brain screamed, "Shut up! Take this chance and be grateful you're even here." I extended my hand to her and said, "Your chariot awaits, my queen." She laughed, took my hand, and I walked her to the car. I asked where we were headed, and she gave me the name of an upscale restaurant, mentioning there was no rush since our reservation wasn't until 7. On the drive, we made small talk, reminiscing about old classmates, asking if we'd stayed in touch with anyone. She asked if I had gone to the 5-year reunion. I hadn't, and she said she missed it too, as she had been in Italy at the time. When we arrived at the restaurant, I checked us in and told the hostess we'd be at the bar until our table was ready. We found an empty table, ordered drinks, and after taking the first sip, Tanya looked at me and said with a sly smile, "You're dying of curiosity, aren't you?" I looked into her smiling face and couldn't help but say, "I can barely stop myself from screaming. Why? For 9 years you barely paid me any attention, and now you're practically hitting on me? Of course I'm curious." "It's simple, Frank. I want you to marry me." "You must be joking." "This is no joke, Frank. I want you to marry me." To say I was stunned would be a massive understatement. The girl I'd been infatuated with since 8th grade was sitting across from me, asking me to marry her. After years of asking her out, countless times from the day we met until college graduation, she never said yes, not even once. We'd never even had a proper date, and now she was asking for my hand in marriage. It was beyond comprehension. I sat there, frozen, glass halfway to my lips, completely speechless. She smiled and urged, "Say something, Frank. Don't just sit there. Say something." I finally pulled myself together and managed to respond, "Simple? You call that simple?" I admit there are a few details to work out, but people have been doing this for millions of years. The formula is pretty straightforward. License, blood test, ceremony. But we don't even know each other. God knows I've tried to get to know you for over 9 years, but the truth is, we hardly know anything about each other. What's there to know, Frank? You're a man, I'm a woman, and we're both of legal age, And don't try to tell me you're not attracted to me. I saw your face when I opened the door tonight. I won't deny it, but looks alone aren't enough. I learned that the hard way from my marriage to Nancy. Just as I said that, the hostess approached us to let us know our table was ready. As I followed behind Tanya, watching her walk, I couldn't help but think that if looks were enough, I'd have whisked us off to Vegas that very night. But I knew better. I'd learned that from Nancy. Once we were seated and had ordered, I decided to cut to the chase. So, Tanya, what's really going on here? What's this all about? I don't know what you mean. Come on. You know exactly what I mean. I chased you for 9 years without a single date. Then, after 4 years of not seeing each other, you suddenly ask me to marry you after a 40-minute lunch? I wasn't born yesterday, so what's the deal? Her smile faded, and she finally confessed, I just found out I'm pregnant, and for reasons I'd rather not get into right now, I need to get married as soon as possible. I need a husband before this becomes public, and ideally I want the timing to seem natural, like the wedding and the baby's arrival were planned. What about the father? Why not marry him? I don't know who he is, and even if I did, I wouldn't marry that bastard. That raises more questions than it answers, Tanya. The biggest one being, why me? You bought me a drink that night at the landing strip. What does that have to do with anything? I've been back in town for a little over 2 weeks now, and I haven't found anyone who fits what I'm looking for. There were a couple of guys who might be worth considering if I had the time to develop a relationship and get to know them better, but I don't have that luxury. I need this to happen now. When you sent me that drink at the landing strip, I recognized you immediately. The waitress pointed you out, and I thought, maybe the guy who chased me all those years would still be interested. Maybe you'd jump at the chance to be with me. I probably would have jumped at it without hesitation if I hadn't already gone through a marriage to someone who cheated on me. And what does that have to do with this? Why would I want to marry someone who's promiscuous after being burned by infidelity once? What? Where is that coming from? From what you've told me, you're pregnant, and you don't even know who the father is. That suggests a level of promiscuity that makes me question how faithful you'd be in the long run. You don't know anything about me. It's pretty harsh to make those kinds of assumptions. And that circles back to what I said when you first asked me to marry you. We don't know each other at all, but I do know this. I'm not about to leap into another mess, especially after what I went through with Nancy. And then there's the whole situation you're not ready to talk about. So you're saying you're not against marriage, but you're not willing to dive in without knowing all the facts? Exactly. I wouldn't even consider it until I knew everything I could. She looked at me for a long moment, then shrugged. I was hoping that after dinner we could grab a drink and maybe dance, but I guess that idea is off the table now. I don't want to discuss my situation in public, so if you'll take me home, I'll make some coffee and tell you the whole sad story. We drove to her house in silence. Once inside, she gestured for me to sit on the couch while she headed to the kitchen to make coffee. As I sat there, I couldn't help but wonder why I was even still here. I should have just walked her to the door, kissed her on the cheek, and gone home. But curiosity and the lingering feelings I had for her kept me rooted to the spot. I was lost in thought when I heard her voice. What? I asked, snapping back to the present. I asked if you take cream and sugar. Just cream. She returned from the kitchen with a tray holding a carafe of coffee, 2 cups, and a small pitcher of cream. She set it down on the coffee table and poured us both a cup. I'll let you add your own cream, she said, settling into the armchair across from me. I took a sip, set my cup down, and waited. It's not a pretty story, she began, and it doesn't paint me in the best light, but here it is. I got messed up at a promotion party. I don't know if I was drugged or just too drunk to know what I was doing. I don't know if it was rape or not. What I do know is that when it was all over, I was in an impossible situation. 2 of the men involved were relatives of my boss, the owner of the company. One was his eldest son, and the other was his nephew. If I had screamed rape and gone to the hospital for a drug test, my career would have been over. I've worked too hard to climb the corporate ladder. Twice I earned promotions to the position of district manager. I decided to bury that night and consider it one of life's brutal lessons. It wasn't easy to deal with because 4 of the 7 guys worked with me. They figured that since it happened once, they could pressure me into doing it again. They kept pursuing me relentlessly. I fought them off, but the harassment didn't stop. I couldn't report it to management because it would turn into a whole gang retaliation thing. Luckily for me, the district manager at the local office had to leave the company for personal reasons. When they offered me the position, it was a no-brainer. I moved, and the day after I arrived, I found out I was pregnant. I don't see that as a problem. Being a single mom isn't exactly unusual these days. And that brings me to something else I wasn't eager to discuss. My family is very traditional. If I ended up pregnant and unmarried, they'd disown me in a heartbeat. I know this for a fact. It happened to my sister. No one in the family except me has spoken to her in over 6 years. Honestly, they don't sound like people I'd want to be associated with. I can understand a father being difficult, but a mother who would turn her back on her own child? That's beyond harsh. I'd rather not dwell on it. The point is, I need to stay in good standing with my parents. But why? You're an adult. You should be able to make your own choices and live your life the way you want. I'll admit it doesn't paint me in the best light, but I'm a bit greedy. My parents are extremely wealthy, and I stand to inherit a substantial amount when they pass. So, you're considering marrying someone you barely know just for a potential inheritance? No, Frank. I'm considering it for $6 to $10 million. You've got to be joking. I'm completely serious, Frank. You have other options. You don't have to go through with the pregnancy. If you terminate it, your family never has to know. I can't do that, Frank. I might be a bit greedy, and maybe I've made some poor choices, but I can't just get rid of something that's part of me now. She looked at me for a few moments, then asked, "Could you do it, Frank? Could you end a life you helped create?" "It would never be my decision, Tanya. If it were up to me, I'd object. But in the end, it's the woman's choice. It's her body, so it's her call." "Well, I've made my decision. I'm having this baby." "Even if it means you can't find a husband and might lose your inheritance?" I said I'm a little greedy, Frank, but I'm not obsessed. Sometimes you have to make tough choices and live with the consequences. So, what do you say, Frank? Will you help a girl out? What exactly would that look like? What do you mean? I'm talking about the logistics. How long would this arrangement last? A year? 2? And what about divorce? Living arrangements? How do we handle social situations? What kind of front do we need to maintain? Why are you bringing up divorce when we're not even married yet? Come on, Tanya. Let's not kid ourselves. This would be a marriage of convenience. There's no love or affection involved. It's not even a business deal. For me, it would just be doing a favor for an old acquaintance. "Don't you need anything?" she asked as she stood up and began undressing. Naked, except for her stockings and high-heeled shoes, she gave me a provocative look. "You call this nothing? You've been pursuing this for years, Frank, and I saw the way you looked at me when I opened the door. Are you going to back out now that you have the chance? And what's this talk about living arrangements? If we get married, it will be a real marriage. If it makes you feel better, I'll draft a prenup and you can sign it. But let me make it clear, I'm as opposed to divorce as I am to abortion. Any divorce would be your doing, and not mine. There will be no separate rooms or separate beds." As she spoke, my eyes couldn't help but linger on her nearly naked form, a sight that had predictable effects. Noticing my reaction, she commented, "I can see that part of you isn't entirely repulsed by the idea." She approached me, leaned in, and whispered, "Come on, Frank. Follow me into the bedroom and I'll show you what's in store." The night was exhausting, but eventually we fell asleep in each other's arms. In the morning, I awoke to the sound of the shower. I considered joining her, but decided against it. After dressing, I went to the kitchen and discovered that she had the same brand of coffee maker I did. I found the coffee and filters and set up the coffee pot. Noticing bacon and eggs in the refrigerator, I pulled them out, located some frying pans, and began making breakfast. As I cooked, I thought back to the previous night. I used to tell myself that if looks alone were enough, we'd elope to Vegas for a quickie wedding with an Elvis impersonator. But I knew that looks alone weren't enough. As I added cheese to the scrambled eggs, I seriously considered what Tanya had asked. When she entered the kitchen, I told her, "The coffee's ready and breakfast will be done soon. Just bacon, eggs, and cheese." "Looks like you've been hired. When can you start?" she teased. Although I knew she was joking about hiring me as a breakfast chef, I decided to play along. "Depends on how quickly we can sort out the legalities." Legalities? Yes, things like prenups, marriage licenses, blood tests, and finding someone to officiate the ceremony. "You're serious? You're actually considering this? Will you really go through with it?" "If you're willing to meet certain conditions." "Conditions? What do you mean?" "First and foremost, a prenup to protect me in case the marriage ends. Second, a written agreement that includes financial penalties if you cheat while we're married." "I don't understand. Isn't that what a prenup is for?" "Don't you need anything?" she asked, standing up and undressing. Naked, except for her stockings and high-heeled shoes, she eyed me provocatively. "You call that nothing? After all these years of you pursuing me and the way you looked at me when I opened the door, are you going to back out now that you have the chance? And what's this about living arrangements? If we get married, it'll be a real marriage." "If it makes you feel better, I'll draft a prenup and you can sign it. But let me be clear, I'm as opposed to divorce as I am to abortion. Any divorce that happens will be your decision, not mine. There will be no separate rooms or separate beds." As she spoke, my gaze lingered on her nearly naked form, and she noticed. "I can see that part of you isn't entirely repulsed by the idea." She walked over to me, leaned in, and whispered, "Come on, Frank. Follow me to the bedroom and I'll show you what's in store." The night was exhausting, but eventually we fell asleep together. In the morning, I woke up to the sound of the shower. I considered joining her, but decided against it. After dressing, I went to the kitchen and found that she had the same brand of coffee maker as I did. I rummaged around until I found the coffee and filters, set up the coffee pot, and noticed bacon and eggs in the refrigerator. I took them out, found some frying pans, and began cooking breakfast. As I worked, I reflected on the previous night. I used to think that if looks alone were enough, we'd be on a plane to Vegas for a quickie wedding. But I knew that looks alone weren't enough. As I added cheese to the scrambled eggs, I seriously considered what Tanya had asked. When she came into the kitchen, I told her, "The coffee's ready and breakfast will be done soon. Just bacon, eggs, and cheese." "Looks like you've been hired. When can you start?" she teased. Though I knew she was joking about hiring me as a breakfast chef, I decided to take it a step further. "Depends on how quickly we sort out the legalities." Legalities? Yes. Things like prenups, marriage licenses, blood tests, and finding someone to officiate the ceremony. "You're serious? You really want to go through with this?" "If you're willing to meet certain conditions." "Conditions? What kind of conditions?" "First, a prenup to protect me if the marriage ends. Second, a liquidated damages agreement to penalize you with monetary fines if you cheat while we're married." "I don't understand. Isn't that what a prenup is for?" "No. A prenup only states that if the marriage ends, both parties keep what they brought to the marriage and split what they acquired together. The liquidated damages agreement will ensure I get compensated for putting my life on hold for you, only to have you cheat on me." "Why are you already thinking about me cheating when we're not even married yet?" "Why should I expect you to be faithful? We're not marrying for love. It's a marriage of convenience for you to keep your family intact. You don't know anything about me, and after living together for 8 or 9 months, you might decide you don't like me. After the baby is born, you might look for someone better suited to you." "I can see that happening, and I'm fine with it as long as you're honest with me. What I won't tolerate is infidelity behind my back. If you do that, it's bound to come out, whether from me or someone who knows me. The rumors and awkward conversations will be unavoidable. A liquidated damages agreement won't erase that, but it will help mitigate the discomfort." "So, how much is the fine going to be?" "Isn't it interesting that you're already worried about the cost before we're even married?" "Don't be foolish, Frank. I need to know so I can instruct my lawyer on what to include. I'll leave the amount up to you. Choose a sum that reflects what you think it should cost you if you cheat on me." So, a prenup and a liquidated damages agreement. Any other stipulations? Two more. First, in public, you will treat me as a loving wife would treat her husband. No problem. I was planning to do that anyway. What's the last condition? I need to have nights like last night at least twice a week. Only twice? Am I really that bad? You were amazing. But let's be clear. We're entering a marriage of convenience. I'm giving up my freedom, and since I won't be dating or fulfilling my sexual needs elsewhere, I need to ensure that I'm taken care of. The 2 nights a week minimum is just that, a minimum. I'll gladly accept more if offered. There's no way to legally enforce that. Besides, such an agreement wouldn't hold up. It doesn't need to be in writing. If you agree to the condition and don't honor it, I'll simply make the marriage public and disclose the reasons behind it. The people you wanted to keep in the dark will find out what you didn't want them to know. When I finished, I could tell from her expression that this wasn't going as she had expected or hoped. I asked, "Do we have a deal?" She looked at me for a moment, then said, "I don't have a choice. I need to act quickly. I don't have time to date and find the right person later." She paused, then asked, "Why? Why do you even want to do this?" The simple truth is that I have nothing else to do. Don't you have anything better to occupy your time? After what happened with Nancy, I'm not interested in a long-term relationship. Mostly, I work and come home. On weekends, I try to relieve my sexual tension, but it's often not enough. This arrangement will save me money and provide the sexual satisfaction I need. Her reaction made me curious, so I asked, "Do you have doubts now?" She shrugged and replied, "No doubts, just that this isn't going as I imagined." How did you expect it to go? Honestly, given how you pursued me in high school, I thought you'd jump at the chance, and that would be the end of it. I didn't expect you to be so businesslike. It's not off-putting, just unexpected. She paused and then said, "There's not much we can do until Monday. We can apply for the marriage license and take the blood tests then. I also have a meeting with an attorney scheduled to review all the legalities. There's a 3-day waiting period, so we could get married next Thursday or Friday. Is that okay with you?" "That works. It gives us time to address some other issues." "Like what?" "Like where we're going to live. Do you own this place?" "No, it's a sublet. I've rented it for 2 months while the owner is away in England. It's just a temporary solution while I look for my own place." "I kept the house in the divorce. Unless you have objections, we can live there." "I don't have a problem with that. Next, we need to see my parents. I need to introduce you to them. They'll want to know why we're rushing things, so I'll tell them that we need to marry quickly because I'm pregnant." "What will they think of me? A woman having sex without being married?" "They won't think much of it. My mom will be thrilled to finally be a grandmother. I'll leave it up to you to decide how and when to tell your family." That's going to be tricky. I can't use the "I'm pregnant, so we have to marry" story. I'll say we met at a party, fell madly in love, and eloped to Vegas. They won't be happy, but the deed will be done. My mom will be furious because she's been planning my wedding for years. I'm hoping she'll calm down once she hears about the baby. She's been pushing for me to get married and give her grandchildren. "I thought she already had a grandchild. Didn't you say your sister was pregnant?" "She had a miscarriage." "That's unfortunate. Does she live nearby?" "No. She moved to Georgia after my parents disowned her." "We should visit her when we get a chance. Do you have plans for the weekend?" "I was going to go grocery shopping today or tomorrow, but nothing beyond that." "Let's hold off on that. We can use the weekend to move you in with me, and then you can see what's already in the pantry and refrigerator before shopping." That's what we did. By Sunday afternoon, Tanya had moved in and was making a grocery list. We went to Safeway to buy everything she needed and then had dinner at Outback. When we got home, I called my mom to let her know about the wedding and asked when would be a good time to introduce Tanya. She said to come by for lunch on Monday. On Monday, we applied for the marriage license and took the blood tests. Tanya met with a lawyer who said he would prepare the necessary paperwork for her to sign on Wednesday. In the evening, we went to my parents' house for dinner. The evening went well, and Tanya and Mom seemed to get along. I noticed Dad's approving look, but he pulled me aside and asked if I was sure about this decision. "It hasn't been that long since you divorced Nancy. Are you sure this isn't a rash decision? I surprised him when I replied, I'm marrying Tanya for the same reason you married Mom. She's pregnant, and I'm marrying her. How long have you known each other? Years. I found your marriage license while going through your desk looking for paper clips. Given the dates, it was easy to figure out. Well, I hope you find happiness together, just as your mom and I did. Mom gave me a warm smile and said, She seems like a lovely girl. I hope everything works out. I'd hate to see you go through another divorce. What will be, Mom. But remember, it's not love that's bringing us together. It's necessity. If you put in the effort, love can develop. You can trust me on that. On the way home, Tanya remarked, I really like your parents. They seem very nice. They liked you too. Dad even told me to do everything I could to keep you. Are you going to? It's a two-way street, Tanya. It takes both of us. We made love every night, starting with our date on Friday. By Wednesday afternoon, the papers were ready, and we signed and had them notarized. On Friday at 11 o'clock, we were married in a civil ceremony with my parents as witnesses, marking the start of our new life together. Surprisingly, it went well. We discovered a lot about each other that's usually learned during courtship. We found we liked the same foods, most of the same music, and the same authors. There were some differences. She enjoyed chick flicks, while I preferred action movies and thrillers. She was an avid bridge player, which I didn't care for, but we both enjoyed pinochle, euchre, and cribbage. We were both into fitness and ran regularly, and she joined the gym where I worked out. Just 2 days into our marriage, Tanya introduced me to her parents. Their reaction to our Vegas elopement and Elvis impersonator was less than warm. The evening was awkward, and I was relieved when Tanya said we needed to leave. They'll come around once they have a grandchild, Tanya said. Over the next 2 months, we attended dinners and barbecues with both families so they could get to know each other. At the wedding, Tanya told everyone she got pregnant. On our honeymoon, except for her parents, most of her relatives were welcoming, and my family was pleased, saying I'd found a gem. Oddly, my parents and Tanya's parents got along well. Tanya was right. Her parents softened once they learned they were going to be grandparents. I might not have cracked their top 10, but I might have moved up to 11th. There were some challenges along the way. Tanya's demanding job meant long hours and weekends. When I confronted her about it, she said she was determined to become the company's first female vice president. How are you going to manage that with a baby on the way? I asked. I'll use daycare. I'll work until the baby's born, take maternity leave, and then go back. I wasn't entirely convinced, but she was set on her path, and I had little say in it. Despite her busy schedule, Tanya never let our lovemaking dwindle. As her due date approached, our life slowed down a bit, but we continued to be intimate about 3 times a week until the middle of her 8th month. Then, Tanya said no more until after the baby was born, and the doctor gave the go-ahead. However, the baby arrived unexpectedly while she was at work. She took a cab to St. Joseph's Hospital and called me on the way. Since my office was only 3 blocks away, I was waiting outside the emergency room when her cab pulled up. I called my parents to keep them informed. When Tanya arrived, she was quickly taken to the maternity ward. After a 4-hour wait, the doctor came out to let us know both mother and baby were doing fine. My father-in-law was speechless when he saw that his grandson was named after him. Tanya's choice was something I didn't mind, and it earned me a handshake and a thank you from my father-in-law, along with a surprising hug from my mother-in-law. It was the first time she seemed genuinely warm towards me. I suspect I'm now in 7th or 8th place in their estimation. My family arrived about half an hour later, cooing over the baby. I felt a pang of guilt that the baby wasn't biologically mine, but I had committed to playing a role, and I was fulfilling it. Tanya had been moved to the convalescent ward, and as soon as the nurse said we could visit, we all rushed to her. She was lying in bed with little Jason Alexander in her arms, and I had never seen a more beautiful sight. Tanya smiled at me and held the baby out, saying, "I'd like you to meet your son, Frankie." I took little Alex from Tanya, and something unexpected happened. I had planned to be a pretend father, But as soon as the baby's tiny hand wrapped around my finger, everything changed. When he gazed up at me and whimpered, I silently vowed to be the best father he could ever hope for. The next morning, I picked up Tanya and little Alex at 10 and drove them home, helping them settle into their new place. I had taken a week off work to support Tanya, but that plan quickly unraveled. It turned out the grandmothers had conspired to take over care of Tanya and the baby. They insisted on managing everything themselves, and with nowhere else to go, I had to return to work. It was clear that if the grandparents had their way, little Jason Alexander Dalton would be thoroughly spoiled. The next 2 years seemed to fly by. Tanya took only 4 weeks of maternity leave before returning to work. This decision infuriated the grandmothers, who were adamant that their Alex should not go to daycare. They devised a schedule to alternate, taking him to and from school while Tanya was at work. Professionally, Tanya was thriving, moving from district manager to regional manager, and was now just 1 step away from the vice presidency she was determined to achieve. I was doing well too, though my path to success was smoother, thanks to the family-owned nature of my business. On a personal level, I found my mom's advice to be true. Love develops if you work at it, and I was committed to doing just that. Everything seemed to be going well until one evening when Tanya came home from work looking distressed. She revealed a serious problem. A man was blackmailing her with old explicit photos. "He gave me until tomorrow to make a decision," she said. "I don't see the issue," I responded calmly. "Let's meet with him." "Are you out of your mind?" "Of course not," I reassured her, then explained our plan. She smiled and, finding the idea exciting, suggested we spend some time in the bedroom before heading to her mom's to pick up Alex. It seemed like a good idea to me, so we took her up on it. William Bagley was the name of the man in question, and he seemed to have trouble meeting my gaze. Perhaps it was due to his current predicament. Maria? He was naked and seated on one of our kitchen chairs, securely bound, with only his right arm free and a cloth stuffed in his mouth. The chair was pushed up against the kitchen table, which had a notebook, a ballpoint pen, a soldering iron, and a small butane torch on it. How did William end up in this situation? Tanya had invited him to her office, informing him that she couldn't make it for a long lunch due to the busy office schedule, and that she wasn't able to meet him at the motel to avoid being seen by anyone who might recognize her. She also told him that I would be out of town on business Tuesday through Thursday, and that she would send Alex to her mother's house for the night, so William could come over on Wednesday. This way, she could ensure I would be away and wouldn't unexpectedly stop by. When William arrived, Tanya was wearing nothing but a pair of high-heeled shoes. She greeted him with a smile and let him in. As soon as he stepped inside, I came out from behind the door and struck him with a baseball bat. I then pulled him into the chair, secured him, and Tanya and I went into the bedroom. Upon our return to the kitchen, we found William struggling against his bonds. Tanya and I sat down at the table across from him, and I said, "I'm sorry to say, but you've upset my wife, William. As her husband, I'm committed to doing whatever it takes to address this situation. Today we're going to resolve the issue that caused her distress." Oh, I reached in and removed the cloth from his mouth, and he immediately started pleading to be released. "That's not going to happen, William, not until you comply with our requests." "I'm going to report you to the authorities for this," he shouted. I stood up and gave him a firm slap, then shoved the cloth back into his mouth. "Here's how it's going to work, William. You're going to take this pen and write down where we can find all the photos you have of Tanya, and then you'll list the names of everyone who has copies of those pictures. You can do that, or I'll use this soldering iron to mark blackmailer on your chest, followed by a bit of torch work. The choice is yours, the easy way or the hard way." He glared at me defiantly, but made no move to take the pen. I shrugged, picked up the butane torch, and ignited it. As I approached him with the flame, he quickly grabbed the pen and began writing. Once he finished, Tanya reviewed his notes. Willie claimed that the photos were only stored on his laptop and insisted he was the only one taking pictures that night. "Do you believe him?" I asked Tanya. She shrugged. I removed the cloth from Willie's mouth and said, "My fiancé isn't fully convinced you're being truthful, so we may need to take additional measures. I reignited the butane torch and moved it closer to Willie's leg. I'm telling you the truth. I looked at Tanya. She shrugged again and said, We'll find out if he's lying. I turned off the torch and added, If you decide to involve the authorities, remember that blackmail is a serious offense. You'd end up facing consequences as well. Tanya placed a digital recorder on the table, pressed play, and the recording of Willie and Tanya discussing their meeting played. Please don't make me do this. I really don't want to risk everything, Willie pleaded. I understand you're uncomfortable, but you need to cooperate, or I'll ensure this situation impacts your reputation and career, I replied. I stopped the recording and said, We don't need to hear more. There's enough evidence here to take action. If I face consequences, you will too. Where's your laptop? In my motel room, Willie answered. While I kept Willie occupied, Tanya retrieved his laptop from his motel room. We found 21 photos on it, which I copied to a flash drive before deleting them from the computer. Tanya was uneasy about me seeing the photos, but I needed to know who else was involved. After letting Willie get dressed, I handed back his laptop and said, If any of these photos are released and you weren't honest, here's what will happen. First, I'll make sure your employer sees them, exposing the situation. They may take severe actions against you. Second, you should know that there are serious legal implications. Tanya might pursue legal action, and even if it's your word against hers, the evidence we have will support her claim. Lastly, I said, if any photos get out, I will make sure to hold you accountable. Do you understand? Willie nodded and said, Yes, I understand. As Willie left, Tanya asked, Do you think we got all the photos? I'm not sure, I replied, but judging by his reaction, I believe he'll ensure no more are leaked. And if he doesn't? Tanya asked. You know I stand by my word, I said. Tanya then suggested, Seeing those photos gave me some new ideas. Would you like to continue this conversation in the bedroom? With a smile, I followed her to the bedroom.